Being a pilot in the First World War was once called the most dangerous job on Earth. Imagine that, worse than life in the trenches. If trench warfare was hell, then the skies must have been something darker, something even more unforgiving. The numbers prove it. More pilots died in training accidents than in actual combat. These were young men, taking humanity's very first steps into aerial warfare, paying in blood for every lesson learned. At one point, the demand for pilots was so desperate that students with barely 10 hours of solo flying were thrown straight into the front lines. Their life expectancy? No more than 2 weeks. This is the story of the world's first combat aviators. Men who had to die for every single advancement in the air. World War I would, for the first time in history, unleash aircraft on a scale never seen before, and the world would never be the same again. From that day on, the airplane would never leave the battlefield, only evolve, only become deadlier. But at the outbreak of war in 1914, aviation was still in its infancy. It had been barely a decade since the Wright brothers had lifted their fragile machine into the sky. Senior officers scoffed at the idea of these flimsy contraptions having any real military value. How wrong they were. When the war began, cavalry charges and sweeping maneuvers met their doom in a storm of machine guns and quick-firing artillery. The earth itself became a graveyard of mud, barbed wire, and endless trenches. And above this, stalemate, flimsy wooden airplanes began their first role, not as killers but as eyes in the sky. It didn't take long to prove their worth. British pilots spotted a German flanking maneuver near Mons, saving their forces from encirclement. At the First Battle of the Marne, aircraft identified weaknesses in the German lines, guiding a counterattack that shattered the advance. By September 1914, airplanes were already the primary source of real-time battlefield intelligence. No one, not even the most forward-thinking generals, could have imagined what they were about to become. France entered the war with 141 planes, Germany with 295, Britain sent just 50 to France. Pitiful numbers. Yet within just 2 years, the skies would be filled with tens of thousands. Constant observation from above destroyed the element of surprise. Armies dug in deeper, trench lines grew longer, and the stalemate tightened its grip. Soon aerial photography was added. Every new trench, every hidden gun position, captured and catalogued from above. But the sky was never going to remain peaceful. At first, when opposing reconnaissance planes crossed paths, they often waved and flew their separate ways. A strange, almost gentlemanly courtesy. But it didn't last. If you had eyes in the sky and your enemy didn't, the balance of the battlefield tilted completely in your favor. The era of the fighter plane was about to begin. At first, pilots were armed with little more than pistols. They fired at each other desperately in the air, often with more courage than accuracy. A French crew carrying a carbine scored the first victory, wounding a German observer. Just weeks later, a Russian pilot rammed an Austrian plane in mid-air. The first recorded kill in aerial combat. He destroyed the enemy and himself. Then came the first true dogfight. October 5, 1914. A French two-seater armed with a Hotchkiss machine gun engaged a German two-seater returning fire with rifles. Bullets snapped through the air. The French gun jammed after just 2 magazines, and the fight carried on with rifles until the German plane's fuel tank was hit. Flames engulfed it, sending the crew to their deaths. The age of aerial combat had arrived, but one great problem remained: the machine gun. Where could it be mounted? Planes were fragile, engines barely strong enough to push them past 80 miles per hour. The wings couldn't carry the weight. Mounting it beside the pilot meant shooting straight into the spinning propeller. Some tried anyway. Bullets shattered their own blades, sending them crashing in flames. Others tried firing above the propeller, but accuracy was impossible. The British experimented with pusher designs, engines behind the pilot, gun at the front. But the design was awkward, unstable, and slow. The solution remained elusive. By the end of 1914, aerial encounters were desperate improvisations. Of the 800 aircraft deployed, dozens had already been lost, many not to enemy fire, but to unreliable engines and accidents. Still, the race for the skies accelerated. Then, in 1915, everything changed. A French pilot, Roland Garros, attached steel deflectors to his propeller blades so bullets would bounce harmlessly aside. He downed 3 German planes this way, before being captured, his invention falling into enemy hands. The design reached Dutch engineer Anthony Fokker. He perfected it, creating the interrupter gear, a mechanism that synchronized the machine gun with the propeller, firing only when the blades were clear. The result was devastating. On July 1, 1915, German pilot Kurt Wintgens used the new synchronized gun to shoot down a French plane. It was the dawn of the Fokker Scourge. The Fokker Eindecker monoplane dominated the skies, unmatched, cutting down Allied planes with terrifying ease. Superiority had arrived, and with it, the first aces, pilots who scored 5 or more confirmed kills. The skies had become a battleground of predators. The Allies scrambled. France built the Nieuport with guns mounted above the wings. Britain kept pushing their awkward pusher designs. But nothing matched the Eindecker until one fell into Allied hands in April 1916. Its synchronization gear was copied and improved. Once again, the playing field leveled and the deadly dance in the skies raged on. Yet flying these machines was a nightmare even without an enemy. At 20,000 feet, oxygen thinned, pilots grew dizzy, even passed out. The first crude oxygen tanks and masks appeared. Engines sprayed castor oil fumes, a powerful laxative. Many pilots flew sick, vomiting or worse, while trying to aim their guns. Open cockpits exposed them to 30 degrees Celsius cold. Frostbite gnawed at their skin. Engines screamed in their ears until deafness was common, but their greatest fear was fire. Fuel tanks sat above the pilot's head. Leaks drenched them in gasoline. A single spark, a tracer round, and the plane became a torch. Once flames caught hold, there was no hope. Many carried revolvers, knowing exactly when they would use them. Some jumped to their deaths rather than burn alive. French ace Raoul Lufbery did just that, leaping from 3,000 feet when fire consumed his plane. Parachutes. Balloon observers had them. Pilots did not. German flyers got some near the end of the war, though they worked barely 60% of the time. For most Allied pilots, there was nothing but the seatbelt, and even those were only issued after men fell out of their planes mid-flight. By mid-1917, the life expectancy of a British pilot at the front was just 3 weeks. In bloody April, squadrons were wiped out in weeks, replacements surviving mere days. By the war's end, Britain had lost 14,000 airmen, France 3,500, Germany 5,000. The percentages were horrifying. Pilots were more likely to die than infantry officers, yet the importance of air power only grew. The skies became a relentless arms race. Every innovation brought one side an edge until the other countered it. On the ground, strange shapes appeared in the skies, observation balloons and mighty zeppelins. Balloons, tethered high above the battlefield, were the deadliest intelligence tools of the war. Observers with telephones directed artillery strikes with chilling precision. Entire sectors of the front were defined by the number of balloons overhead. But they were floating bombs, filled with hydrogen. One burst of incendiary ammunition could ignite them in a fireball. Balloon busting became a suicide mission. Fighters dove into walls of anti-aircraft fire, machine guns, and patrolling planes. Many never returned. Balloons were so valuable that their observers were the only regular airmen issued parachutes. Zeppelins, meanwhile, struck terror into civilian hearts. Massive floating monsters, they carried tons of bombs and reached deep into Britain. For the first time, civilians cowered under aerial bombardment. The psychological shock was immense. But hydrogen betrayed them too. Once targeted by fighters or flak, they erupted into catastrophic fireballs, crews of 30 perishing in blazing infernos. By 1917, they were little more than reconnaissance craft over the North Sea. Strategic bombing passed instead to giant aircraft like Gotha bombers, continuing the terror raids over Britain. And then came 1918. The skies over Europe thundered with machines unrecognizable from those fragile wooden frames of 1914. The German Fokker D7, powered by a BMW engine, was so feared that after the war, the Treaty of Versailles demanded every single one be surrendered. Britain fielded the Sopwith Snipe, with twin Vickers guns and a roaring Bentley engine. Fighters, once scouts, now strafed. Trenches, bombed supply lines, hunted at night and supported armies on the ground. In 4 short years, the leap in technology was staggering. But this was only the beginning. World War I had forged air power in fire and blood, and nothing would ever be the same. And if you'd like us to tell the story of what came next, the pilots of World War II, let us know in the comments below. See you in the next one.